"Mark me," the Alpha King growled. "Let him know you belong to me." The night was heavy with mist, curling around the towers of Calethorn's palace like ghostly fingers. The Alpha King stood at the highest balcony, his cloak catching the pale moonlight, his eyes scanning the darkened forest beyond. Every heartbeat of the kingdom seemed to echo through him, a rhythm of power and expectation. And yet, there was a restlessness, a hunger he could not name. He was a king feared and respected, but even kings were not immune to the pull of fate. Tonight, the winds carried something unusual. A scent. A presence that made the hair on his arms rise and his chest tighten. It was not danger. It was challenge. It was not threat. It was destiny. Elara had arrived at the palace gates that very afternoon. A quiet woman, slender but strong, with eyes like storm clouds, she seemed at first an ordinary guest, a messenger of peace from a distant territory. Yet to Calethorn she was immediately anything but ordinary. The moment she entered the hall, moving through the golden torchlight, the air between them seemed to shimmer. He did not understand it. Not yet, but the pull was undeniable. She walked with grace, cautious but unafraid, her gaze sweeping over the opulent court. The nobles whispered as she passed. Rumors of her mysterious past clung to her like shadowed wings. Calethorn's enemies would have been satisfied to see her falter, yet she did not. And in her strength he felt an unfamiliar stir of admiration, perhaps even longing. "Your Grace," the envoy who brought her spoke, bowing low. "This is Elara of the Windmere line. She comes to honor the peace between our lands." Calethorn's eyes never left her. He nodded once, curtly, masking the rapid beating of his heart. Peace. Duty. Yet the words on the envoy's tongue could not touch what was already forming in the air between him and Elara. It was a silent acknowledgement, an invisible thread that neither of them could yet name. The court assembled for the ceremonial feast, golden plates gleaming with roast meats and candied fruits. Yet Calethorn noticed little of the food or the laughter of nobles. His gaze remained on Elara as she took her place near the center of the hall, her hands folded delicately in front of her. Every gesture, every shift of her posture, seemed to mark a rhythm he could almost hear. It was then that the rival lord, Lord Valor, a man whose ambition was as sharp as the sword he carried at his side, rose from his chair. He had come with his own claims of alliance, but also with the intent to unsettle Calethorn. "Your Grace," Valor said, voice smooth like polished steel, "surely you will not claim loyalty from lands that are promised to another. Elara is no subject of your kingdom." The hall fell into a tense silence. Eyes darted between Calethorn and Valor, the courtiers sensing a storm about to erupt. Elara's heart quickened. She knew that Valor's words were not mere challenge. They were a threat, a gauntlet thrown at the feet of the king who now watched her with unreadable eyes. Calethorn's voice broke the silence. Low, commanding, and impossibly certain, he spoke words that seemed to echo against the vaulted ceilings. "Mark me," he said, his gaze locked onto Elara's. "Let him know you belong to me." The hall froze. Even the flickering torches seemed to hesitate. There was no anger in his voice, nor cruelty. There was an undeniable power, a claim that was deeper than law, deeper than politics. It was a declaration of fate itself. Elara felt a heat rise through her chest, and a strange light flickered across her skin. Not pain, not fear, but something old and hidden, awakening. It was as if her own blood recognized the words, as if something long dormant in her soul had been called to life. She could feel the pull between them, a bond that stretched invisibly but firmly, like a thread of silver fire. Valor's face darkened.
"This is impossible. You cannot—" Calethorn raised a hand, silencing him with a gesture that carried centuries of authority. "It is done."
Not by law, not by right, by choice, and by destiny. Elara's mind reeled. She had been prepared for many things in her life. War, loss, exile, but never this. Never a bond that seemed to predate even the stars themselves. And yet, as she met Calthorn's eyes, she realized she did not fear him. Not entirely. There was something in that gaze, a loneliness, a longing that mirrored the unrest in her own heart. The feast ended in silence, the courtiers whispering, some in awe, some in fear. Elara was escorted to her chambers, but her thoughts could not escape the echo of Calthorn's claim. Every shadow seemed to whisper his name. Every candle flickered with the memory of his eyes. And in the distance, unseen by either, Vaelor plodded, knowing that the challenge was only beginning. Night deepened. Elara stood at her window, looking out over the darkened forest that bordered the palace. Moonlight fell softly on her face, and she felt the bond thrumming beneath her skin. It was gentle yet insistent, like a heartbeat she could not ignore. Calthorn, far above in the tower, watched the moonlit path leading to her chamber. He felt the same thread pull at him, a force that both terrified and captivated him. He had ruled with an iron hand, controlled every battle, every law, every soul that bent before him, but never had he faced something like this. Not a sword, not a rival, not even death. Something, alive and untamed and utterly unyielding. The night seemed to stretch endlessly, holding its breath. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying secrets of the land, of curses long forgotten, of promises yet unspoken. Calthorn's hand brushed the hilt of his sword, but he knew it would not be enough. The war that had begun tonight was not one of armies, but of hearts and fates intertwined. But suddenly, the air in Elara's chambers shimmered. A strange warmth spread across her skin, and a pulse, steady and strong, seemed to beat in time with Calthorn's own heart. She gasped softly, stepping back, and in the shadows a second presence stirred. Something ancient, something hidden in her blood recognized the king's claim, and not entirely willingly. The mark of the bond glowed faintly, almost imperceptible, across her wrist. Not pain, not fear, but awakening. Elara touched it gently, feeling the hum of power, the whisper of connection. She understood then that she was no longer merely a guest in this kingdom. She was something else, something marked, something destined. And far above her, Calthorn clenched his fist, feeling the same pull, the same thread that tied their fates together. He could not break it, and yet he feared the consequences. The bond was alive, unpredictable, and dangerous. But more than that, it was irresistible. The first night passed without sleep. The moon traced its path across the sky, and with every hour the bond pulsed stronger, echoing through both their souls. Neither king nor woman had yet spoken of what it meant, and yet both understood. The challenge had begun. The connection had been claimed, and the fate of their hearts, and perhaps the entire kingdom, was now entwined. As dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of blood red and gold, a raven cawed from the tower battlements. It was a single sharp cry, yet it carried a warning. Something, or someone, watched, and the shadow that lingered in the palace gardens, unseen by all, whispered that the bond between Calthorn and Elara would not go untested. The Alpha King descended the staircase to the great hall, cloak billowing, eyes sharp. He did not see the rival lord plotting in silence, nor the faint glow of magic in Elara's room. What he did feel was the thread of destiny pulling him forward, toward her, toward the unknown, toward a future that neither of them could yet control. And in that moment the kingdom seemed to hold its breath. A king claimed a woman not by law, not by threat, but by something older and deeper than either of them. Something that could bind hearts, bend wills, and awaken power long thought lost. The first part of their story ended with the dawn, but the journey had only begun. The threads of fate were woven tight, and the first stirrings of love, fear, and desire had been set in motion. Elara and Calthorn would not remain who they were when the next moon rose. They would be changed forever. The palace awoke with whispers the morning after Calthorn's claim. Courtiers spoke in low voices, their words floating like smoke across the marble floors. Some whispered fear, others awe. But Elara, standing by her window, felt none of it. She felt only the lingering pulse in her blood, the invisible thread that tied her to the Alpha King. She did not yet understand the bond, only that it existed, undeniable and insistent. It was not a chain, but a rhythm, a heartbeat that followed hers. She could feel it in every step she took, in every breath she drew. The world seemed sharper, brighter, and yet heavier. She had not expected belonging to feel like this, like standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing that the fall could be either ruin or awakening. Cale Thorne watched from the courtyard, unseen by her. The castle's stone walls could not block the pull of the bond. Each glance, each step, each sigh of hers echoed through him. It was maddening. He had ruled kingdoms, commanded armies, and bent enemies to his will, but never had he faced this, a human heart, tethered to his own, yet resisting him in small, defiant ways. Elara's mornings became a careful balance between compliance and quiet rebellion. She spoke when required, moved with grace, and followed court etiquette, but her eyes often betrayed her thoughts. Cale Thorne noticed every flicker of emotion. Every small smile or fleeting scowl drew his attention like a hawk to prey. And he found himself thinking of her in moments when he should have been plotting or governing. "Why do you linger in the hallways alone?" Cale Thorne asked one afternoon, appearing beside her without a sound. He did not startle her. She had grown accustomed to his presence, though she had not grown comfortable. Elara straightened. "I am only walking, Your Grace." "The halls are long. The air is better than the kitchens." He studied her. The faint quiver in her hands, the steady set of her jaw. She was strong, but aware of the weight of his gaze. "You are not like other women," he said, almost to himself. "Not like any who have come before." Her heart tightened. She wanted to retreat, to pull away from the bond that was already making itself known. And yet she found herself drawn to him, as if an invisible wind tugged her forward. "I am no one special," she said softly, though the words lacked conviction. "Specialness is not required," he murmured, the corners of his mouth tightening. "Recognition is." The court watched their growing connection with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Whispers followed her like shadows, and Cale Thorne's presence, both protective and dominating, became impossible to ignore. Some nobles saw a king claiming what was not theirs. Others saw fate in motion, ancient magic stirring in the blood of a woman neither fully prepared for nor fully aware of her own strength. Then the rival Lord Valor made his move. He had not forgiven Cale Thorne's public claim. That night he slipped into the palace gardens, under the cloak of darkness. His intention was simple: to awaken the dormant power in Elara, to turn it against the Alpha King. But Elara sensed him before he even came close. A prickling at the back of her neck, a pulse in the bond warned her. Something in her blood, something that had been dormant, stirred, alert, and wary. She did not know if it was the bond or her own instinct, but she moved silently, shadow-like, toward the figure hiding among the hedges. "You should not be here," she said, voice steady. Her eyes glowed faintly in the moonlight. Baelor froze. "I do not fear a woman," he said, trying to mask his surprise. "I fear only the king, and you are his pawn." Elara's fingers brushed against the hidden mark on her wrist. The glow flared brighter. It was not magic she had learned, not skill she had trained for. It was the thread of the bond, reacting to threat. And in that light, Cale Thorne appeared behind her, moving faster than shadow, his presence filling the garden like a storm. "You forget yourself," Cale Thorne said, calm but unyielding. "She is not a pawn, Valor, and you will not touch her." Valor staggered back. The Alpha King's aura pressed against him, heavy as iron and sharp as a blade. Elara felt it too, not as fear, but as something that sang in her chest. The bond responded, wrapping around her like warm silk, protective and binding. "I will not bow to your claim," Valor hissed. "It is not right." Cale Thorne's hand rested lightly on the hilt of his sword, yet he did not strike. "Right and wrong are not your concern. he said softly. Your concern is survival, and you may leave or you may not leave at all. Valor vanished into the shadows, defeated but plodding still. And as the echoes of his footsteps faded, Elara turned to Calethorn, noticing the tension in his jaw, the silent storm in his eyes. Why do you protect me so? She asked, almost whispering. Calethorn's gaze softened briefly. Because the bond demands it, he said. Because I cannot let you fall, even if I do not yet understand why. The words hung between them, heavier than the night air. Elara did not speak. She only felt the bond tighten, pulling her toward him, and she realized with a shiver that her life was no longer her own. Not entirely. She belonged to something greater, something dangerous, something that demanded more than obedience. It demanded trust. The days that followed were filled with lessons and warnings. Calethorn allowed her to move through the palace, but always under his watch. He taught her to read the signs of power, to sense the flow of the land, to feel the currents that ran beneath the stone walls. Every lesson was a test, every step a challenge to her courage. And every time she met his gaze, the bond pulsed, a silent reminder that their destinies were intertwined. Elara, for her part, struggled with the weight of it all. She had known ambition, politics, and danger in her quiet life, but nothing like this. Nothing that made her heart race not with fear, but with longing and uncertainty. She realized, too, that the bond demanded not obedience alone, but honesty. She could not hide from Calethorn, not when every heartbeat, every breath, every whisper carried across the invisible thread. One evening, as rain fell in silver sheets against the palace windows, Calethorn found her alone in the library. The scent of wet stone and old parchment filled the air. She had been reading the chronicles of the Windmere line, tracing her ancestry in search of strength and understanding. You read to know yourself, he said, voice low, or to find a way to control what you cannot yet name. Elara closed the book, meeting his eyes. Perhaps both, she said softly. Perhaps I am trying to understand why fate brought me here. To you. Calethorn stepped closer, the air around him charged. Fate, he murmured, does not ask for permission. It claims, it tests, it demands. You will learn that soon enough. The bond pulsed, strong and alive, and for the first time Elara felt the subtle weight of her own power. Not in strength or skill, but in presence, in the quiet insistence that she, too, mattered, that she, too, could shape the destiny that sought to claim her. And yet that power came with cost. Every pulse of the bond reminded her that her choice mattered, not only to her own heart, but to the land, to Calethorn, and to forces she could not yet name. She understood in that instant that the coming days would test her, bend her and demand sacrifices she could scarcely imagine. The following night, a letter arrived from Valor, slipped under her chamber door. It was not just words. It was a challenge, a threat, a promise that he would return, stronger, more cunning, more dangerous. Elara's pulse quickened, not in fear, but in awareness. She touched the hidden mark and felt the bond respond, thrumming with life, protective and insistent. Calethorn appeared behind her, as silent as shadow, and his hand hovered near hers. He will not touch you, he said, his voice low and certain. And if he tries, he will regret it. Elara turned, meeting his eyes. I do not wish to be a prize, Calethorn, she said, her voice steady. I wish only to survive and to live, not to be claimed. He looked at her then, really looked, and for a moment the mask of the Alpha King fell away. In its place was something older, rawer, human. You are not a prize, he said quietly. You are my bond, and I will not fail you. The rain tapped against the windows, soft and relentless, as though echoing the tension in the room. They stood in silence, the bond humming between them, alive, heavy, and unbroken. Neither moved, yet the air between them seemed to shift, charged with unspoken words, unresolved questions, and an undeniable connection neither fully understood. Outside the palace walls, the wind stirred. carrying a warning. The enemy was near. The bond was stronger than either of them had yet realized, and the night was only beginning. The castle was silent that morning, yet it felt heavier than usual, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Calethorn strode through the corridors, boots echoing against stone, eyes dark with a storm that no crown could calm. The bond with Elara pulsed beneath his skin, stronger now than ever, yet laced with tension he could not control. It was not enough to claim her, not enough to protect her. The Alpha King knew there was something else at work, something older than any king, older than the palace itself, something that had waited centuries, biding its time, tied to his bloodline and the fate of every ruler who had dared to love and lead. Elara had sensed it too. The night before, the pulse in her blood had grown sharper, deeper, almost painful. When she had tried to sleep, visions had come, flashes of ancient halls, whispers in languages she did not know, shadows of kings who had failed before Calethorn. She woke with her heart pounding, her hand instinctively pressed to the faint glow on her wrist, the mark of the bond. Calethorn found her at dawn, standing on the balcony overlooking the misted forest. The wind tugged at her hair and cloak, and yet she stood firm, her gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the horizon. "You feel it," he said, stepping closer, voice low, carrying authority and concern. "The curse. It stirs again." Elara turned, eyes wide. "The curse?" she asked. I do not understand." He studied her, the weight of centuries in his gaze.
It is not new.
"It is old, older than any crown I wear. It is the curse of our line, meant to punish kings who rule with both power and compassion. Love is the weakness it seeks, and yet, in you, it awakens something that may save me." Her fingers brushed the mark instinctively. "Me? How can I save anyone?" "You are tied to me now," he said, his tone soft but firm. "Not just by words, not just by law, but by something older. The bond does more than link hearts. It awakens power. You may not understand it yet, but it is real, and it is dangerous."
Alara's breath caught.
She had felt the threat of the bond, yes, but she had not realized it could carry power, ancient and terrible. Her pulse quickened. "Then, what do we do?" Calethorn placed a hand lightly on the balcony railing, leaning closer, his presence overwhelming yet protective. "We prepare." "The curse seeks to break me, to consume me. And if it awakens fully, it will not stop with me. It will seek you too." The first days were a trial. Calethorn taught her to sense the currents of the land, to hear the pulse of magic beneath stone and water. He guided her to feel the energy of the bond, to control it, even if only slightly. Each lesson was exhausting, each moment of connection a test. Elara struggled against fear, against doubt, against the rising awareness of the power she did not yet control. And then Valar struck again. This time, not with words, but with action. The rival lord infiltrated the eastern forest, seeking to claim a relic of power that could awaken the dormant magic in Alara's blood. He moved with speed and secrecy, and for a moment it seemed the palace guards might fail to stop him. But the bond pulsed sharply, warning Elara of danger before any sword was drawn. She did not hesitate. The power inside her stirred, responding to the threat, guiding her through the shadows, moving faster than she had ever thought possible. The forest seemed alive beneath her feet, each tree and stone whispering secrets, bending to her awareness. She emerged from the darkened path just as Valar reached the ancient shrine, relic in hand. "You should not have come," she said, her voice carrying authority she had not yet felt before. Valar froze, his eyes wide. "How?" The mark glowed faintly at first, then brightening as the bond thrummed between them. Calethorn arrived beside her, silent as shadow, but he did not touch her. He only watched, letting the bond's energy flow, guiding her without command. "You are stronger than I thought," Calethorn murmured, pride and awe in his voice. Elara's hand hovered over the relic, and she felt a choice, a decision that could either unleash power or destroy her entirely. She drew on the bond, focusing on its pulse, its rhythm, and the warmth that came from Calethorn's presence. Slowly, the relic's glow dimmed, responding to her will. Valor stumbled back, fear overtaking arrogance. This is not possible," he whispered. "You underestimated her," Calethorn said quietly, "and you underestimated the bond." Valor fled into the forest, defeated but not gone. The threat had not ended. It had only changed shape. And as Alara looked at Calethorn, she realized something profound. She was no longer merely a pawn. She was a participant, an equal in a power that was older than any throne. But the victory came with a cost. The bond pulsed violently, leaving her trembling, exhausted, aware that every use of the power drew a toll. Calethorn sensed it too and pulled her into the safety of the palace walls. "You pushed too far," he said, holding her close, his presence steadying her. "The bond reacts to choice, yes, but it also reacts to overreach. You must learn patience. You must learn control." Alara nodded, though her mind was racing. She had felt strength, true strength in her veins, and yet the reminder of danger, the curse that sought to destroy Calethorn, the enemy that sought to claim her power, kept her wary. The days passed with careful balance, training, lessons, moments of quiet reflection. Calethorn taught her more than skill. He taught her patience, strategy, and trust. Yet each lesson carried tension. Their emotions, bound and unspoken, pulsed beneath every gesture. A glance held too long, a hand brushing accidentally, a word with hidden meaning. They were all tests, all moments that could ignite the bond beyond control. One evening, Calethorn led her to the old tower overlooking the northern cliffs. The wind tore at their cloaks, the waves below crashing like thunder against stone. "You feel the curse in the land as well," he said, voice almost lost to the wind. "It is old. It waits in shadows, and it watches those who grow too close, too strong, too human." Alara looked down at the cliffs, heart pounding. What does it want from us? Fear, pain, separation. It feeds on the weakness it believes it finds in hearts tied together. She shivered, not from cold, but from the weight of the revelation. "Then we fight it together?" Calethorn's eyes softened, the mask of the Alpha King giving way to a man aware of mortality, loneliness, and love. "Yes, together. But know this, the curse is clever. It tests not strength of arms, but of heart. One mistake, one moment of doubt, and it will strike." Alara nodded, determination rising in her chest. She felt the bond respond, steady and alive, but she also sensed the danger that waited in the shadows. It was no longer enough to survive. She had to be ready. Not just for Valor, not just for the curse, but for the forces that sought to unravel the bond itself. Night fell, and the palace seemed quieter than usual, though no one slept easily. The wind moaned through the towers, carrying with it secrets of the past, whispers of kings who had failed, and the echoes of battles yet to come. Calethorn stood beside her, silent, sensing the subtle tremor in her pulse. "Do you feel it?" he asked softly. "Yes," she whispered. "Something watching, waiting. The curse," he said, voice low. "And something else. Something that is neither friend nor foe. You felt it before the night we first bonded. It stirs now stronger than ever." Alara's pulse quickened. She had felt the presence in her blood, the second thread that was neither her own nor Calethorn's, whispering in a language she could not understand. She realized with a shiver that the coming days would test not only her courage but the very core of the bond itself. Calethorn turned toward her, his hand brushing against hers for a moment, a silent reassurance. "No matter what comes," he said, "we face it together, you and I, always." Alara nodded, but inside a fear lingered. The bond pulsed violently, thrumming like a living thing. She felt the ancient presence in her blood stir fully, no longer a whisper but a voice. It spoke in riddles, in warnings, in fragments of prophecy. She did not understand its words, but she knew one thing clearly. The trials ahead would demand everything: strength, courage, and a choice she might not be ready to make. The night stretched on, the palace silent save for the wind and the distant crash of waves. The bond pulsed, alive and insistent, carrying with it a promise and a warning. Calethorn would not yet speak of what was coming, but Alara felt it deep in her bones. The curse was awakening fully, and when it did, neither the king nor the woman bound to him would remain unchanged. The dawn was cold and gray. The sky stretched thin over the palace towers like a pale veil. The wind carried the scent of rain yet to fall, and Calethorn walked the outer ramparts, hand resting on the hilt of his sword. The curse had grown stronger with each passing day. It was no longer whispers or subtle threats. It was a storm, thrumming through the stone walls, through the land, and through the bond that tied him to Alara. He had tried to shield her, to teach her, to prepare her. And yet he knew the truth. Preparation alone would not suffice. The bond pulsed violently beneath his skin, reminding him of the life they had woven together, and the power that now stirred within her. Alara was no longer just a guest in the kingdom, no longer a pawn of destiny. She was a force in her own right, and he feared yet respected that strength. Alara stood on the balcony of her chambers, the wind tugging at her hair and cloak. Her mark glowed faintly, pulsing with the rhythm of the bond. She had felt the second presence in her blood stir throughout the night, whispering words she could not understand. Yet for the first time she did not fear it. She welcomed it. She understood that this ancient power, wild and restless, was part of her, and part of the destiny she shared with Calethorn. "Are you ready?" Calethorn's voice came from behind her, low and steady, carrying both command and reassurance. Alara turned to him, her eyes reflecting the stormy sky. "I am," she said. Her voice was calm, but inside, her heart raced with anticipation and fear. "I do not know if I am ready, but I will not run." Calethorn studied her for a long moment. He saw the fire in her eyes, the courage that had grown from their bond, and the power she now held. He knew then that the coming battle, against the curse, against the Veiler, against the darkness, would not be faced by him alone. She would fight by his side, not as a pawn, but as a partner. Together, they descended into the lower halls of the palace, the air thick with tension. The servants had been sent away, the guards positioned at key entrances, and yet the hall seemed haunted by something unseen. Shadows shifted in the corners of their eyes, and the pulse of the curse thrummed through the stone, echoing the heartbeat of the bond between them. Veiler had returned. The rival lord had discovered a way to manipulate the curse, to awaken the ancient forces that lay dormant in Alara's blood. His ambition was simple: to seize the power of the woman claimed by the Alpha King and use it to overthrow Calethorn. But Calethorn and Alara were ready. The first clash came in the great hall. Veiler had conjured shadows that twisted and writhed like living things, feeding on fear and doubt. The torches flickered as the darkness spread, and the bond between Calethorn and Alara flared with energy, pushing back against the shadows. "Do not fear it," Calethorn said, voice carrying over the chaos. "Trust the bond. Trust me. Trust yourself." Alara closed her eyes, feeling the rhythm of their connection. The second presence stirred, not in opposition, but in alignment. She realized that it was not the curse itself, but the untapped part of her own power, waiting to be claimed. Slowly she raised her hands, feeling the currents of energy flow through her, shaping the shadows, bending them back into light. The battle was not of swords alone, but of wills. Veiler screamed in frustration as the shadows resisted him, as Alara's strength grew with every pulse of the bond. Calethorn moved beside her, not leading but flowing with her energy, a perfect balance of command and surrender, dominance and trust. Together they pushed the darkness back, each heartbeat a drumbeat of defiance. And then the curse struck. A wave of cold, black energy surged through the hall, separating Calethorn and Alara for a heartbeat. The mark on her wrist flared violently, and the second presence in her blood cried out in warning. Baylor smirked, thinking victory was near. But Alara did not falter. She reached deep within herself, past fear, past doubt, past the whispers of ancient kings who had failed before her. She felt the bond, strong and steady, and she made a choice, not to be claimed, not to be controlled, but to claim herself. The energy of her will flared, a radiant pulse of light that broke the curse's hold, flowing through Calethorn, through the hall, and through the land itself. The shadows dissipated, the torches burned brighter, and Baylor fell to his knees, defeated by the power of choice and unity. Calethorn moved to her side, placing a hand over hers. The bond hummed gently now, steady and warm, no longer wild or uncertain. He looked at her, his eyes reflecting relief, awe, and something deeper. Gratitude, love, and respect. "You did it," he said softly. "You saved us." Alara shook her head, smiling faintly. "We did it. Together." The aftermath was quiet. The palace breathed again, the air lighter than it had been in decades. The curse, once a looming shadow over Calethorn's reign, had been broken, not destroyed, but balanced. And in the process, both king and woman had been transformed. Alara had discovered the full extent of her power, the second presence in her blood now a steady guiding force rather than a restless whisper. Calethorn had learned that control was not the same as love, and that true strength came not from domination, but from trust and choice. In the days that followed, the kingdom began to heal. The nobles, once fearful, now watched with respect as Calethorn ruled with clarity and wisdom, his connection to Alara visible but not threatening. The people sensed the change in the air, a shift from fear to hope, from obedience to loyalty earned through courage and fairness. Alara, too, changed. She moved through the halls not as a pawn, not as a prize, but as a queen in her own right, her voice heard, her presence respected, her power acknowledged. She and Calethorn met often in the quiet hours, sharing thoughts, strategies, and moments of rare vulnerability. Their bond, once a tether, had become a bridge, a connection of equals, forged in challenge and tempered by choice. Yet the memory of the curse lingered, a reminder that power demanded responsibility, that the past was never truly gone, and that vigilance was always required. One evening, under the pale light of a rising moon, Calethorn led Alara to the highest balcony of the palace. Below them the kingdom stretched like a tapestry, rivers shining silver in the moonlight, forests dark and alive with whispering winds. "You have changed everything," Calethorn said quietly, his hand brushing hers. "Not just for me, but for all of us. You have faced what I could not, and you have prevailed." Alara smiled, feeling the warmth of the bond, the pulse of life that had carried them through darkness. "We have faced it together, and we have chosen. That is the difference." Calethorn nodded, eyes softening. "Choice," he repeated, as if tasting the word for the first time. "It is more powerful than any crown, any sword, any law, and it has given us freedom." The second presence within her stirred lightly, no longer a voice, but a gentle hum, a reminder of the strength she carried and the bond she had embraced. Alara realized in that moment that true power had never been about domination, nor fear, nor even protection. It had always been about the courage to choose, to stand, to act, and to love freely. The moon rose higher, casting silver light over the two of them. The kingdom was quiet, but alive. The storm had passed, and yet the future remained uncertain, filled with possibility, danger, and hope. Calethorn turned to her, and for the first time his crown seemed lighter on his head. "You belong to yourself," he said softly. "And I belong to you because I choose to, not by claim, not by bond, but by will." Alara felt tears rise, not of sorrow, but of relief, pride, and a deep, enduring love. "And I choose you," she said, freely, fully, without fear. The wind picked up, wrapping around them like a cloak of blessing. The bond glowed softly, warm and steady, a pulse of life and unity that no curse, no rival, no shadow could touch. They had faced the darkness together, and they had emerged transformed, not as king and subject, not as master and pawn, but as partners, equals, and lovers bound by choice. Below, the kingdom slept, unaware of the epic struggle that had passed through its halls. Yet it would feel the echo of the bond in every law, every act of mercy, every choice made in the days to come. The tale of the Alpha King and the woman who chose herself would be told in whispers, in songs, in legends for generations. Calethorn and Alara stood side by side, watching the first light of dawn touch the distant mountains. The palace, the kingdom, the curse, all of it had tested them, but they had endured. The bond was no longer a chain, no longer a threat, no longer a symbol of claim. It was life itself, a pulse, a rhythm, a choice freely made. The Alpha King's reign had begun anew, not with fear, not with domination, but with trust, respect, and love. And Alara, the woman who had been claimed, had discovered that true belonging was never about possession. It was about choice. As the sun rose over the horizon, painting the sky with gold and rose, Calethorn turned to Alara and smiled. "This is only the beginning," he said. Alara's eyes sparkled. "Then we face it together," she said. The bond pulsed warmly between them, steady and alive. The kingdom, the curse, and the hearts of two people had been transformed. And for the first time in centuries, the future felt bright, open, and free.